I'm building a open woodshed behind the shop. The idea being that I have all of these stacks of slabs around the house and in the shop, and I'd like to get them all put away somewhere. So that's what this shed is mostly going to be for. I realized as I got started on this project that I really need a portable miter saw. I've done several projects around the house now, and it becomes somewhat of a pain having to go back to the shop every time I need to make a cut in something. 1 or 2 times is okay, but when you've done it for the 1000th time, it starts to get a little old. So I got a new miter saw. I realized pretty quickly that I'm going to need some kind of stand to put it on. I can't just put it on the ground, although that would work, just wouldn't be very comfortable. So I did a little search and looked for designs for miter saw stands. Something that I saw that I thought would work is an idea where you make the structure for the stand a single beam, and all of the parts of the stand hang off that beam. And this kind of design would let me pack the whole setup up and keep it stored out of the way when I'm not using it. And it would let me set the stand up on anything. It could be on sawhorses, it could be on a table, it could be on whatever I'm working on. You know, if I'm building a deck or something like that, I could put it on that. So the idea is it's a single beam. The support for the saw can hang off that beam, and the supports for the material can also be on that beam. So I went and got a 2x8 for the main structure of the miter saw stand, and I started to make the parts. Most of this project is attaching 2x4s together with screws. You can see here what happens when you don't have support for the material when it gets cut. The idea is going to be that the supports that attach to the beam are going to be 2 2x4s sandwiched around the beam. I cut a piece that'll be the spacer for all of these different parts. The first support I made was the support for the beam itself. So this piece will go from whatever the setup is sitting on, in this case sawhorses. This will hold the beam in place. So it has a nice wide bottom, and I can attach that to the vertical 2x4 pieces that are spaced the width apart that the width of the beam is. You can see how the beam will fit within that slot. One thing that is nice about this miter saw is that it does angled cuts well. I haven't really set my radial arm saws up to do that. I know I'm known for using old DeWalt radial arm saws, and I don't plan on stopping that. I think, like I said before, this saw is meant to be portable and that I can move it around the house and to different projects. The radial arm saws are not that portable. I tried once. It's really hard. This new miter saw works well. I certainly have nothing bad to say about it. And I'm not partial to DeWalt. I'm not sponsored by them. It just happened to be the one that I picked up. I added some diagonal bracing. I started working on the supports for the saw. So these will be the pieces that'll hold the platform for the saw to sit on. And I made the same 2x4 sandwich to go around the beam. And I attached some 2x4s to the top of that, which will be what the saw will sit on. And I used the same spacers to go around the beam. And I added some diagonal supports to these as well, a little shorter. They're pretty stiff the way they are, even without the supports. I figured with the saw sitting there, it should have those supports. I can put the saw on, and it seems to work. It seems to hold it in place okay. The last thing to make was slightly trickier. I wanted to make two pieces that would hold the ends of whatever workpiece was being cut. Those needed to be at the height of the table or the height of the cutting surface of the saw. So it was the same 2x4 sandwich with the same top, but I wanted that top to be at a specific height. I tried clamping a board to the bottom of the beam to use sort of as a stop. But it ended up, that didn't really work that well. I had to shim my 2x4s up a little bit. I put the spacer piece in once the 2x4s were clamped in the right location. So that spacer is now the spacer between the 2x4s, but it's also the stop to hold this whole piece at the right height above the beam. And once I had everything set in the right place, I could attach the parts with screws. I put the top on first, and then I attached the spacer piece. And with this one, I didn't even bother with the diagonal bracing. It seemed to be fine without it. So that can go wherever it's needed on the beam, depending on the length of the workpiece. I can bring everything outside and set it up. So bring out the sawhorses. And I kind of brought the beam and a lot of the parts out at once. That was sort of easier. The one small issue that might happen in the future is if the beam starts to warp or change shape over time. Sometimes lumber will do that. And then the whole system will have a twist in it and may not really work that well. So you can see the saw supports can go anywhere along that length, depending on which side of the saw I'm going to work on, or right in the center. I brought the saw out, just barely portable. And then the material supports can go wherever they're needed along that length. So if I'm cutting something long, I have the support out at the end of the materials. I was thinking originally I would bolt the saw to the wood platform, but that didn't make a whole lot of sense if I wanted to be able to break it down quickly. So I just clamped the saw onto the frame. I put a stop on one of the material supports, and that was somewhat helpful, as I can then cut the same length of pieces quickly. Also, the sandwich pieces around the beams can be clamped so that they won't move. The parts that are clamped will be locked into place. I used the stand and the saw to build the shed, which is now mostly done, and it worked really well. So far, the beam hasn't twisted, still seems to be nice and straight. In the next few weeks, I should have a video out about building the shed. Thanks for watching.